tell us what it was like growing up after what happened to your brother?
It was hard for me and my sister.
I knew that they knew he was dead, so I just looked like blank at them,
2 decades ago, a 12-year-old boy named Lionel Tate.
To prosecute Lionel Tate in the state of Florida in the juvenile court system.
I so much believe in God and forgiveness that I have forgiven you, Lionel, for brutally murdering my daughter.
Meant that Lionel was facing 6 to 9 months in juvenile detention.
Going to prison can be one of the most daunting experiences of a lifetime. Between a life behind bars and the aggression and violence that takes place on the inside among jailers, a person has to be made of tough stuff to get by in prison. Today, we will look into some of the most dangerous yet youngest convicts behind bars. Number 3, Mary Bell. Mary Bell was a young British girl who became infamous for committing double slaying when she was just 10 years old. Her story shocked the world and raised many questions about the nature of childhood, criminal responsibility, and the efficacy of the juvenile justice system. Mary Bell was born on May 26, 1957, in Newcastle upon Tyne, England. She was raised in a troubled environment, with her mother Betty being a body worker and a heavy drinker. Mary's father was unknown, and she was often left to fend for herself or in the care of strangers. Mary was a troubled child from a young age, showing signs of aggression and destructive behavior. She would often bully other children and torture animals, including a neighbor's pet. On May 25, 1968, the day before her 11th birthday, Mary Bell committed her first slay. She strangled 4-year-old Martin Brown, who lived in the same neighborhood, and left his body on a derelict house's floor. Martin's demise was initially ruled an accident, and Mary attended his funeral with her mother. However, Mary and her accomplice, 13-year-old Norma Bell, no relation, then went on to commit another slaying.
And it was one of the women from up the street. She said, Martin's been hurt.
Sharon, can you tell us what it was like growing up after what happened to your brother?
It was hard for me and my sister.
I knew that they knew he was dead, so I just looked like blank at them,
The first time I met Mary Bell,
Knowing what Mary Bell did to your child and your family, how do you feel about her now?
There was a bit of blood trickling down his face. With that, I slammed the door in her face, and I just collapsed behind the door.
And obviously when she received that money, she received it in an assumed name, not a Mary Bell.
I was just white, lifeless. Just before Martin was buried, they came to my house and asked if they could see him.
I felt that something bad.
2 months later, on July 31, 1968, Mary and Norma strangled 3-year-old Brian Howe in a nearby wasteland. They mutilated his body with scissors and knives, carving the letter M into his stomach and legs. The two girls also left behind a note that claimed responsibility for Martin Brown's demise. The slayers caused panic and outrage in the community and the country. The police launched a massive manhunt, and Mary and Norma became prime suspects due to their suspicious behavior and erratic statements. Eventually, the girls confessed to the slayings, with Mary showing no remorse and even bragging about her actions. Mary's trial began on December 5, 1968, at Newcastle Crown Court. It was a highly publicized and controversial case, with many experts testifying about Mary's mental state and the possibility of her being a psychopath. The prosecution argued that Mary was fully aware of her actions and should be held criminally responsible despite her young age. The defense argued that Mary suffered from a severe personality disorder and should be treated as a victim of her environment. Mary was found guilty of manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility, as the jury believed she was not fully aware of the consequences of her actions. She was sentenced to be detained at Her Majesty's pleasure, which is the UK's equivalent of a life sentence. Norma Bell was acquitted of all charges and released. Mary spent the next 12 years in various juvenile detention facilities and psychiatric hospitals. She was given a new identity upon her release in 1980 to protect her from public scrutiny and harassment. Mary Bell's story is a tragic and disturbing one that raises many questions about the nature of childhood and the impact of environment on behavior. The case has been studied by psychologists and criminologists as an example of a rare and extreme form of child criminality.
That he had died in horrific circumstances, I was never told.
I knew he was dead then. She says, I know he's dead. She says, I want to see him in his coffin.
When she got out of prison, we'll let her get on with her life. Obviously, she brought herself back into the public eye.
Mary Bell committed 2 dreadful murders,
Which then forced us to then have to talk about it.
and my husband had to come get us and he had to send for the doctor.
Why or how it had happened. It was a very cold house because obviously my mum was grieving, and I think she'd give up her right to anonymity the day she received the money. I didn't know why she was grieving. I knew I'd had a brother, and I knew...
Number 2, Lionel Alexander Tate. Lionel Alexander Tate was a young American who became the youngest person in modern U.S. history to be sentenced to life imprisonment without parole for first-degree slaying. His case raised questions about the criminal justice system's treatment of juveniles and the disparity between the sentences given to minors compared to adults. Lionel Alexander Tate was born on January 30, 1987, in Broward County, Florida. He was raised by his mother, Florida Highway Patrol Trooper Kathleen Grossett Tate, and his father, Washington, D.C. police officer Howard Tate. Lionel was a fan of professional wrestling and aspired to become a wrestler himself. He was also known for being a playful and mischievous child. On July 28, 1999, when Lionel was just 12 years old, he was left alone with 6-year-old Tiffany Unick, the daughter of a family friend, while his mother went shopping. While playing together, Lionel claimed that he accidentally kicked Tiffany and caused her to hit her head on a table, which resulted in her demise. However, the evidence presented in court suggested that Tiffany's injuries were much more severe and consistent with blunt force trauma, including a lacerated liver and several broken ribs. The prosecution argued that Lionel had repeatedly slammed Tiffany into a wall, beat her, and stomped on her, resulting in her demise.
I firmly believe in God, and I believe in forgiveness.
2 decades ago, a 12-year-old boy named Lionel Tate.
To prosecute Lionel Tate in the state of Florida in the juvenile court system.
I so much believe in God and forgiveness that I have forgiven you, Lionel, for brutally murdering my daughter.
He was trying out some TV wrestling moves on her, and she died.
That's 1 month for every year of this little girl's life. And in my estimation...
Unfortunately, because of the way this case played out...
In 2001, he was sentenced to life in prison because of it.
And he'll think about her every day for the rest of his life.
That was not an appropriate sentence.
How does he get to do the normal things that teenagers do?
What should a civilized society do about children who kill?
Meant that Lionel was facing 6 to 9 months in juvenile detention.
He thinks about Tiffany every day. He thought about her every day when he was locked in the jail cell.
Killed a 6-year-old friend named Tiffany Unick.
And that was not justice for this little girl.
Lionel Tate's name is one that is going to be recognized, and...
The medical examiner testified that Tiffany's injuries were equivalent to being hit by a car at 30 miles per hour. Lionel was charged with first-degree murder and faced life imprisonment without parole. During his trial, his defense argued that Lionel was imitating professional wrestling moves on Tiffany and did not intend to harm her. They also argued that Lionel was too young to fully understand the consequences of his actions and should be tried as a juvenile. However, the prosecution argued that Lionel had shown malice and cruelty towards Tiffany, which indicated that he knew what he was doing was wrong. They also argued that the severity of Tiffany's injuries showed that Lionel had used excessive force, making it a premeditated act. In 2001, Lionel was found guilty of first-degree murder and was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. His case received widespread media attention and raised questions about the appropriateness of sentencing minors to life without parole, particularly in cases where there is evidence of immaturity, mental illness, or abuse. In 2003, the Florida Supreme Court overturned Lionel's sentence, stating that the life imprisonment without parole sentence was unconstitutional for a minor. Lionel was resentenced to 30 years in prison with the possibility of parole. In 2004, Lionel's sentence was further reduced to 10 years of probation and 1 year of house arrest, which he served at his mother's home. Lionel's case remains controversial, with many advocates arguing that it was unjust to sentence a 12-year-old to life imprisonment without parole. His case highlights the need to re-examine the way the criminal justice system treats juveniles and the importance of considering their age, maturity, and circumstances when imposing sentences. Number 1. Jesse Pomeroy. Jesse Pomeroy was a notorious American serial slayer who committed a series of gruesome slayings in the late 19th century. Pomeroy is known for his brutal crimes against children, which shocked the nation and led to widespread fear and outrage. Pomeroy's case was one of the first high-profile serial slayer cases in American history and set a precedent for how the legal system deals with such crimes. Jesse Pomeroy was born on November 29, 1859, in Charlestown, Massachusetts. He was the youngest of 2 children and had a troubled childhood marked by frequent abuse and neglect. Pomeroy's mother was known to be harsh and abusive towards him, and he had a strained relationship with his father. Pomeroy began to exhibit disturbing behavior from an early age. He was known to torture animals and had a fascination with demise and violence. As he grew older, Pomeroy's behavior became more erratic, and he began to show signs of sadism and psychopathy. In 1872, when Pomeroy was just 13 years old, he committed his first known slaying. He lured a 4-year-old boy into a secluded area and beat him to death with a stick. Pomeroy was caught and arrested for the crime but was released after serving a brief sentence in a reform school. Pomeroy's release did not deter him from committing further crimes. In 1874, he abducted and slayed a young girl named Katie Curran. He lured her into his family's basement and proceeded to torture and mutilate her. Pomeroy was eventually caught and confessed to the murder. Pomeroy was tried and found guilty of slaying in the first degree. He was sentenced to demise, but his sentence was later commuted to life in prison due to his young age at the time of the crimes. Pomeroy spent the rest of his life in prison, where he continued to exhibit violent and disturbing behavior. He was known to attack fellow inmates and was frequently punished for his behavior. Pomeroy demised in prison on September 29, 1932, at the age of 72. Pomeroy's case had a significant impact on the way the legal system dealt with juvenile criminals. At the time of his arrest, there were no laws specifically governing how minors accused of serious crimes should be treated. Pomeroy's case was one of the first to highlight the need for specialized juvenile justice systems and the importance of rehabilitation rather than punishment for young offenders. Pomeroy's case also sparked a national conversation about the nature of evil and the role that childhood experiences and mental illness play in criminal behavior. Some experts believe that Pomeroy suffered from a personality disorder or psychopathy, which contributed to his violent behavior. Others point to his troubled childhood and abusive upbringing as factors that may have contributed to his criminal behavior. In the years since Pomeroy's crimes, there have been numerous high-profile cases of serial slayers who have targeted children. Pomeroy's case remains a tragic reminder of the dangers of unchecked violence and the importance of early intervention and prevention in cases of juvenile crime. That's all for this video, folks. We'll see you the next time.